Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after the lunch break for the second of our three panels today for the opening day program for Adiós, Utopia, Dreams and Deceptions in Cuban Art since 1950. We had a very rich conversation with the curatorial team and the organizational partners around the exhibition. And our focus this afternoon is to really hear directly from the artists. So each panel will have 5 artists participating with a moderator, and we are very fortunate. If you were here this morning, you heard Gerardo talk about the exhibition, one of the curators of the exhibition, and truly one of Cuba's foremost intellectual minds, renowned independent art critic and curator, whose authoritative voice, not only in Cuban art, but international contemporary art, has been shaping discourse and thinking for decades. And as a young, aspiring curator and as a graduate student myself in the late 80s and early 90s, really invested in Cuban art and in the art of Latin America, Gerardo was a huge, and continues to be a huge inspiration and model to me in terms of the rigor of his scholarship, the clarity of his voice, and his willingness to articulate alternative positions is something that so many of us in the field really appreciate and admire Gerardo. And for decades, Gerardo has been instrumental in really giving a critical context to what's happening in Cuba and putting it in the context of global contemporary art practice. And he is going to be joined today on stage, and he will introduce them. But Glexis, Novoa, Yaima, Carrazana, Reynier, Leyva, Novo, Alejandro Gonzalez, and Sandra Ramos. And this afternoon, they're going to be talking about art and social criticism in Cuba. So please, big round of applause for our panelists and our visitors here this weekend.
I will only read a very brief introduction and then give the floor to the participants. The new Cuban art that appeared late in the 1970s renovated our language, confronted official dogmas and cultural stereotypes, and introduced a general critical approach that, from the visual arts, expanded to all of the arts and have continued until the present. Although stimulated by the events in Eastern Europe, this process began before Perestroika and Glasnost in the Soviet Union as a result of the evolution of the new art itself within the ideological social coordinates of the time in Cuba. Paradoxically, this is exactly what made it possible, since the authorities did not give much importance to the visual arts, creating a space of certain tolerance in contrast to their extreme control over the press and the mass media. This situation is extraordinary, especially if we think of the weakness of civil society in Cuba and the government's dominance in the circulation of information and ideas, to the point that even now access to the internet is extremely limited. Cuban culture is today a critical culture. In a way, art has fulfilled an independent reflexive role that has proven to be difficult in a public sphere under government control. This reflection stems from inside the complex experience of a grand social dream's failure. It is part of the great disenchantment, as Cuban writer Leonardo Padura has called it, a disappointment that has given way to today's cynicism. The artists react to the collapse of a dream, but are at the same time part of it. We live in the ruins of past glories, among the rubble of the city and Utopia. A most common critical method has consisted in appropriating official imagery and rhetoric in order to deconstruct them in a critique of the mechanisms and representations of power. Unlike what occurs in other contexts, in Cuba, humor, appropriation, and deconstruction often go hand in hand. Cuban artists have carried on this critical role through the pulsation of art language capacities without detriment of artistic experimentation. On the contrary, they have taken advantage of the symbolic powers of art to carry on a problematical discourse that interweaves the multiple complexities of art and Cuban life. Luis Kamnitzer has condensed very well the artist's general poetics. Quote, "Formal solutions are the product of ethical speculations. Their work is comprised of an indissoluble web of humor, social criticism, political positions, ethical stance, and formal play. The web is so tight that the removal of any of the parts would lead to the collapse of the work." This panel gathers 5 prominent and very different artists from different generations who are part of Adiós, Utopia exhibition. They will discuss the case of art and criticism in Cuba and its expression in their own artistic practice. We are going to begin with Sandra Ramos. Through a compelling visual dialogue, Sandra has gained an international reputation by expressing her personal relationship regarding political and social realities in Cuba and around the world. In her work, she uses a wide range of materials and techniques as engraving, painting, video, and installation. References to familiar characters from literature, history, and folklore are found in her art. She uses this wisely to make critical statements related to the context of her life and artwork. Ramos studied at the San Alejandro Art Academy and at the Superior Institute of Art, and has exhibited widely around the world. Please, Sandra.
Thank you very much for being here in Walker Art Center. I feel very pleased with the topic, the title, and the work that has been included, because my work that started at the end of the 80s was to try to discover the impact, the loss of the utopia that we all Cubans suffered, and the impact that had in the education, because it was very idealistic. It was a utopian education, in contrast with the reality of life in Cuba, especially in the reality that we lived, and it was living in difficulties. I tried to create this character, a character that involved all of this, and at the same time to be part of my personal experience and make it wider to represent the collective or public experience. All of the children educated in Cuba, we were educated with the same ideology, a utopian ideology, idealist, teaching us to believe in the possibility of a better world. That's in contrast with reality. And this character has been in my works of art, and this is representing the island of Cuba, referring to the migration, the isolation that we feel, that are topics that are dealt with in my pieces of work. And it's traditionally presented like in the culture Cuban. I believe that the tradition, the critical aspect, the points of view, the different people, intellectuals, Heredia, José Martí, they have all been tried to be critical. Gastón Vaquero, many other artists, and I take them as an example. I take them as a model. I refer here to the circumstances that as being surrounded by water, as an island. It has to do with the migration and the use of materials that are symbolic to deal with this aspect of the Cuban reality. This is something I did in 1994, exhibited. It's 10 suitcases that have been painted inside. I asked my friends to give me their suitcases. They were built in the 1950s. They used to go from school to the fields, and I tried to present experiences, stories of people who were dreaming about leaving the country, real stories. And that's what I painted inside these suitcases. This is the type of suitcases that you used in Cuba because there were no stores where you could buy new suitcases. These are the suitcases that we had left after the revolution. The role of the artist in society is what I try to deal with in my work. And these are some of the pieces that my diary as a vocation of suicide. I try to mediate between the art and the reality, to try to create awareness. In that process, the artist suffers too, because you see it, the reality in a different way, and that causes an impact individually. Also, the reality and the awareness, that's part of the personal experience, who you are as an individual, who you are as an artist. Education is another aspect that I try to present in my work. Thinking about the utopia, thinking about indoctrination, thinking about education that on one side is very positive because it opens your mind to an understanding, knowledge, but on the other hand, it pretends to tell you that you shouldn't question. So if we have the tools, we should be questioning things, the circumstances in which we live, in any part of the world. These are other pieces that I represent times of our history, when the country opened to the dollar. They are very important for me because, and they are elements that I have used in. They come from the history of art, the cartoons. These are characters that appear often in my pieces of work, traditional in Cuba, trying to present a link between the Republic and the current country. It's a process that if we don't analyze, then we will be repeating the same mistakes. These represent the dollar. You can see Washington, the face. I have also done installations and documenting different things in the street. This is something I did in 1999. It's a machine that I called a machine to wash your suffering. And you see it in the carnival. People drink rum until you get drunk. It's a massive celebration. It was interesting, the relationship between the alcohol or rum and the sea. As an image that was something that they could escape to. The alcoholism is a serious problem, and the idea is that the container is wrapped with aluminum foil, or so we have been trying to evade the reality through alcohol and through the sea, because we talk about the amount of people who have died in the sea. This is called the electrocardiogram or electrocardiograph. This is it was done for an exhibition that was called the Pacemaker exhibition with Magda Rosales Mora. What I tried here is to present an electrocardiogram of the Cuban society with a video that tried to present different aspects of life in Cuba, like the elderly life, the options that people had, the money, housing, transportation. There were short clips, about 1 minute each, and the person would lie down, and then the video would start going, and it was you could hear the rhythm of the heart that represented the heart of the society. This was an installation that was based on the Big Bear, the constellation, and that has to deal with the uncertainty that we live. We as a species face that uncertainty. I use mirrors. I use vision that's more apocalyptic of the world. This is a piece called 90 Miles, which is the trip from Havana to Miami. This is something I presented in Miami, Cayo Hueso, and there are pictures that I took from Havana to Miami. It's to present something that to say we're very far but very close. We're close but very far, culturally very close, very far politically. And these are separations that are set by governments, not by people. That's the idea in this piece. You can cross in 5 minutes the Florida Strait, but many people have died in that crossing. I have worked with documents too, like passports, other pieces that have to do with the class difference, societies, differences in society, rich and poor. And this is what I did for the biennial in Havana in 2015, showing these pots to show the influence of other countries in Cuba, like China, Russia, the United States, and this is like saying the pot of history. And I live in the United States now, and I have influence from the political media, the lottery, problems that we see in the American society using the lotto tickets. And this is one of the last pieces that I made. This is like a game with videos that have to do with the games that you find in politics, and how that affects the lives of many people.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sandra. Glexis Novoa shares his time between Havana and Miami. Since the late 1980s, he produces art in many different media, including painting, performance, installation, and most recently, graffiti drawings, the material that would become his trademark. Novoa has attained international recognition for his site-specific wall drawings, which exist on the border between ephemeral art and architecture. His work repeatedly turns to the architecture of power and politics as its main subject. And he also was an important performance artist in the 1980s in Cuba. Glexis.
This is very dangerous for me because I'm going to talk about the past. This is a really bad karma for me. Maybe for all of us. I would like to talk about an investigation that I have done about the first decade of performing art in Cuba. I have recognized so many influence of the politics in the art, and more than anything from the methodology of the politics. The politics of Cuba, it was encouraging children and indoctrinating children to the violence since very early. So we are like been growing up like pretty much like a kind of a terrorist. We are trained to assault other people like us in Cuba. So I think the artist is also taking those system and methodologies to perform and to develop the performing art in Cuba, which it was maybe the most wide example of conceptual art in the early 80s. I will show you some images of different artists that use that methodology, taking the street without permission and just taking the space without permission and by surprise. In these cases, you see Leandro Soto in the streets of Cienfuegos. He just take the street and he uses space to produce his art, taking taking the casualty, la suerte de los carros that pass by and smash those cans by mistake. He also take the street without permission and go by the sea, and he performed these abstractions, visual abstractions on the floor, and all of these expressions seems very very mild and really that doesn't harm anybody. But in a country as Cuba during those years, we're talking about 1979 or 1980, only to do something by your own without permission and without taking permission for any institution, that was a very suspicious. So some of those artists were at some point persecuted or put it into the black lists. This is the Grupo Hexágono. They also went to the countryside to produce their art out of the institutions and avoiding the official surveillance and the official not only surveillance but only to, as I mentioned before, only to take place out of the institutions and without asking permission. It was a defiance to this in this environment. This is a Segundo Planes in the Institute of Art in Havana. He organized as part of his production as a student these performances that also it were taking the public spaces, and it was those performances like disrupt the usual environment of the urban space on the school. And also he was questioning. He was one of the artists that was reading things like Freud, that was banned at the time. So he was questioning kind of ideologies that was not proper for a revolutionary artist. We were revolutionary artists. That's something very interesting. This is an image of Grupo Hexágono, once again taking the open landscape by the water in the Santa Maria beaches without taking the institution as a frame to produce their art. and that all of this was created by surprise and very improvised. On the street, once again, Juansi Gonzalez, he was an artist that he was declared himself dissident, maybe the first one who decided to be a dissident, openly dissident, against the repression. And some of the artists that he worked with, he went to jail and then spent long terms in jails because of the ideological speeches. In this case, he's naked on the middle of the street of Havana performing. This was a group of Artecai, a very young group of children that, I will say children, they were maybe teenagers, some of them, just taking the street and taking the walls in a park in Havana, doing graffiti, something that is very usual in the rest of the world. But we're talking about 1982, 83, those kids were like really defiant doing this very infantile, I will say, graffiti, but their actions, it was more important. They were defying the law, defying the strict law of police. The same, Alejandro Lopez in downtown Havana, also encouraging the people to participate in the art, also defying the spaces, the public spaces. This same project, it was dismantled by the Ministry of Interior, and all of these artists just needs to move on into another direction, just avoiding jail or avoiding repression. In this case, is one of my work, Galleria Habana. We took the street once again by surprise, and we blocked the street, the Linea Street, a very centric street, and that was also prepared and organized without saying the authorities exactly what we are intending to do. This is the interior of the gallery. A lot of people from break dancers, from popular dancing from Havana, they went inside the gallery and they danced spontaneously, like a big party inside. There was a group of Artecai, Ariel Serrano, he painted this big portrait of Che Guevara, and he put it on the floor, and then everybody walked on top of this image. The idea of walking on top of this image, it was secret. Nobody knew exactly what was to be happening, but at the end, people start walking on top and dancing on top spontaneously. Once again, it was an assault of the space. It was an assault of the frame of institution. In this case, as a group of Provisional, we run into and we interrupt Robert Rauschenberg lecture at the National Museum of Fine Art, once again, without asking anybody, just by surprise, assaulting the space, assaulting the order of law, assaulting the institutions. This is Aldito Menendez, the same occasion, playing as an Indian in front of the powerful American guy who came to take over to our spaces, and we just laugh on him, in front of him, openly. This is one of my performances in the University of Havana, using blood and guts from a cow. It was also a surprise for the institution when they saw all of this blood on the floor and all of this violence on the building. Nilo Castillo also, he was not invited to the show, but he showed up and he did his piece as a street vendor. It was a double revenge against the artists who didn't invite him to participate, and against the space, the institutions, and the establishment. Also, the Juansi, once again on the street, spontaneously creating these projects that was banned and was censored, and then incarcerated some of these participants. You can see our friend Gerardo Mosquera trying to give a lecture, and then so Group Artecalle just interrupting him. with mask. They didn't want to be intoxicated with the establishment. This is Segundo Planes during his speech presenting his thesis at the university, throwing eggs to the public and showing his ass to everybody. So this is the last expression of Cuban art. All the Cubans art decided not to be censored to create a baseball game, and then Ángel González, who decided to poop on top of the Granma, the official newspaper. So he went to jail 6 months after this performance. So thank you very much.
Gracias, Glexis. Yaima Carrazana was born in Santiago de Cuba and lives and works in Amsterdam. Trained initially as a painter at the San Alejandro National Academy of Arts in Cuba, Carrazana moves freely among various media and formats, such as painting, video, and installation. Throughout this range of media, her work stands out for the way it engages in a highly informed yet frequently irreverent dialogue with the history and discourse of contemporary art, creating work that explores the unstable limits between what is considered art and what is not. Carrazana weaves a delicate web of commentary on the context that determine the way art is received and interpreted in today's globalized art world. Yaima.
Okay, hello. I would like to present few of my work, but basically like a history of what has been my just a second. I just want to show the work I was doing when I was living in Cuba, the first because I left Cuba at the end of 2005. I was educated in the Academy of Art, educated in painting, very academic kind of education, and it wasn't until I started in the Cátedra de Arte de Conducta made by Tania Bruguera that I got interested in the more critical kind of art or more critical view. So I started doing video art when I started in the Cátedra de Arte de Conducta by Tania Bruguera. So then I would like to show you this. For example, here is there are some images of a video I did in 2004, where I was interested in showing or showing people something about the death or the possibilities of the death of Fidel Castro himself. So in this video, the title of this video is "The Hybris of a King," and it's a horse that is walking through a red cloth, and it's a commentary about just the possibility in 2004 of the death of Fidel Castro, because in Cuba, Fidel Castro, we used to call him the horse as a figure of power. So then it was a commentary about just this possibility by the idea of making a horse walking on a red carpet, and then the horse fall down, and is inspired by the mythological idea of the Greek theater, the mythological history of Agamemnon, who walked through a red carpet, and this was just a privilege of gods for the Greek culture. So walking through red carpets, it was just for a person who believe he's a god, so who think he's God. And then after he walked through the red carpet, he died. So he was killed. And then I wanted to represent this mythological idea through the situation in Cuba and the possibility or the thinking about the death of the Cuban dictator. Then after that, I did a few interventions in the street. Like, for example, this poster I did in Cienfuegos that says everything is okay, all in order. Just that, a simple commentary in the street in Cuba, which is supposed to be everything is okay. Then this is the homage of the last neon of Havana, for example. There is a video, I did a video of images of the last light of neon of Havana. And there were all the lights were like broken, and it was like, for example, I did this intervention, let's say, where I put there is a restaurant. This was a restaurant, but the only light that was working was the RES. So I put with the Christmas lights, I put resistance, yeah. Then after this work I was doing at the Cátedra de Arte de Conducta, I decided to leave the island, decided to leave the country, and I immigrated to Spain. And then my work, it becomes a long process of immigration. Everything that I'm working at the moment, you can see just my own reaction of my process of immigration. So I left the country, and for example, in Spain, it was like in Cuba, it was an island where I knew everything. So when I left the country, it was really hard for me. It was a process really complicated of immigration. I did this process of immigration, like I left the country and I lose all the rights there in Cuba, and I couldn't go back to Cuba anymore to live. Like when this process, like when your passport is a stamp with a kind of visa that allows you to enter to your own country. So for me, it was very dramatic process when I left. So then I started living in Madrid, for example, and I concentrate in very small pieces. When in Cuba, I was doing a work very open, and I could work in the street or make interventions in the street. But then in Madrid, the continent, I was feeling it was very big for me, maybe. And then I started concentrating in very small pieces, very small works. And somehow I realized, like, for example, I traveled to Spain with a lot of pills, a lot of Cuban pills. It was maybe because I was so scared. Because in Cuba they were saying, don't when you leave, you're gonna have troubles. You don't gonna have medical care. You don't gonna have medicine. So I traveled with a package of pills. So somehow I started working with pills, painting pills. And then, for example, in these pills, you can see I did 2 pills of Michael Moore, for example, and very symbolical. And for me, these 2 pills for Michael Moore are the 2 pills exactly the same size, the same colors, and the same symbol, because at the end, it's a really there is a lot of myth about what is going on with the medical care in Cuba. Like, for example, I was really sick before going to Spain from my stomach, because in the 90s, el periodo especial, a lot of people, a lot of teenagers has to pass very, very bad problems with the food. And for example, I know that a lot of people from my generation suffer from stomach problems. So I had to travel with all these pills also, because I have stomach problems since I was really, really young. But it's also a consequence of a lot of a lack of food there in Cuba, for example. Then I did different works, like then after that thing in Spain, I left to Amsterdam, because I got the residency in the Rice Academy. So I started doing another kind of work, because it was also another process of immigration. I have to travel from Spain to another country that I didn't know the language, but then I have to show myself as there was so many expectations about what it was a Cuban artist. So we somehow have to, I was feeling like I have to make a kind of work that has to be political, or somehow symbolically political kind of work. So I was feeling in a certain way exotic, political kind of an artist. So then in that moment I was really like rebel about this situation. So then I was start thinking, what is a political situation? What is a really political art? And then I did this kind of installation or performance where I was showing what it was political art. For me, it was maybe this quiche totalitarian paintings, or like for example the totalitarian quiche in the North Korea. This could be a political art because it's responding to the government. But anyway, I don't have so much time. But I have a lot of works that have to do with the situation of being a Cuban artist, or how you react as a Cuban artist with certain things that has to, like for example in these videos, these videos you can see that one of these videos is there in the show. When I started doing this video, I was reacting somehow with the situation of the what it was for me popular taste and elitist taste. So I wanted to mix things like the popular taste and the elitist taste with this. So then I started doing this kind of videos that comes from the YouTube. But there is a lot of choices why I did these videos. It was first because I didn't know internet when I left Cuba, and I only knew all this internet information since I left the country. So for me, information, it was very important because in Cuba, people don't really have information, and especially we artists, we are very curious, and we always try to look for what is going on in the world. And I think the lack of internet and lack of information in Cuba was one of the first reasons why I left the country. So then these videos have to do with few things: my discovering of the internet, my discovering of the YouTube, and also the thinking in education. For example, the thinking of the education like in a certain way as in Cuba is seen like the Cuban government, they talk about the massification of culture. Cuba is going to be the most cultural educated country in the world. And this is a kind of dystopic, utopic idea. And I wanted to use this kind of situation or kind of theme, the dystopic idea in these videos, because, for example, if you see the video that is in the show, the video where I paint, for example, Malevich, there is a lot of distance in between my searching in the internet and then at the end the original painting of Malevich. So at the end, it's just this distance and this topic idea of the searching of the internet and all these connections. Anyway,
Yaima, I'm sorry, we have to cut.
Yes, we have to continue. Anyway, I'm now painting in Amsterdam, trying to integrate in a Dutch culture at the moment. So trying to understand the Dutch culture by my own work. And that's it.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna...
we will have time later in the
yes.
question and answers. So
I'm gonna pass to the last one because I had too many images here. Sorry. So the last one, here.
Okay. Alejandro Gonzalez is a self-taught photographer who began his career working for the press. And since then, in 1999, he began to create series of works commenting different issues in Cuban society. So,
Hola a todos.
How are you, everyone?
Bueno, yo vengo,
Well, I come here.
como dice Mosquera, soy de formación autodidacta.
I am self-taught, I guess. When I started photography,
Fotografía cubana está marcada por la imagen épica.
there were epic messages, images. Raúl Corrales, Alberto Corda,
Que siempre está reflejada
and they were always presenting labor workers, leaders. With all those images, my moment was very different. I started to get out of the adolescence to become what I am today, and that's when the perestroika started in the socialist area of the world, and Cuba was immersed in this paranoia and this fear. And finally, the socialist field disappears, and Cuba is by itself, and we go through this special period That wasn't anything special. It was very critical economically and values too. So I started to create an image of what I considered that time, because the image that the government presented was holding on to the epic image, but it was very distant of the reality. So I decided to create my own testimony, and I took my camera. At night, I started to take pictures of this life that you cannot see in the official publications, and that it was closer to reality. I was trying somehow to erase the mythological image of the 60s and 70s. I always tried to make portraits to show. I thought it was ideal to show people, to show their attributes, to show their outfits. I also touched on different topics that were more sensitive, the differences, sexual differences, the gender, the individual rights or freedoms, that panorama, that because Cuba was either going forward or going backwards. When Fidel Castro leaves the government and leaves the power to Raúl Castro, we were thinking that we were breathing a change and they were talking about things that in the 60s and 70s were repressed. And I started to talk about the nation that's comprised by young people, people who were born after the 90s, people who lived during the special period, the crisis, but they were contradictory, they were contrary to the reality. If you ask commitment to a process that they don't own. So I went through the country taking pictures of teenagers where I tried to reflect their dreams. So I felt that it was always talking about history, and I remember reading an article. I don't remember where it came from, but there was a phrase that they were criticizing the official Cuban press. And they said that far from publishing the present, the Cuban press is an anthology. It's the past. Thinking about that, I started what I called the reconstruction. I changed the method. I always worked like in a documentary with reality. I started to deal with the 50s and 60s, the reality in Cuba during those years, and I tried to present my pictures like in scenes. This is, for example, we talk about how the history was told by the power, and I retell the story, and I tell it the way I perceive it. I present it through something that I call the photographic truth. This is the picture of the most important paper in the nation, paper that's waiting to be printed, the news for tomorrow. Or this other image of the same series. All the images have the title. The title of the series is the date, the moment, the time when this took place. November 9, 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. And within this context, in Cuba, this man sees to the outside, and you see the news on TV. They are broadcasting images of the Berlin Wall. And the reality is that you never saw those images in Cuba. maybe 30 years later, they did broadcast, and I'm not even sure if they did. This is the method that I tried to follow in this series, to retell the history and reconstruct. So I wanted to go back to be able to go forward. And with the same methodology, I tried to take pictures of events. And I presented a series in the Walker Art Center called the Quinquenio Gris, the Gray 5 Years, deciding to talk about a sad time for the civil society, the intellectuals, and they called it the Quinquenio Gris, the five years that are called the gray years, 70 to 75. And this is the official image. We see the first Communist Party Congress, where the dogmas are established, and the politics that are bureaucratic, Stalinist, of what Cuba was going to be. And that's the moment when we're saying goodbye to the utopia. That's previous to the revolution, when they were trying to make the dream reality. And this is when the dream disappears, and you lost that spontaneity. There are 5 images that I tried to put together, and I built with cardboard and lead figures, these pieces based on the original pictures, but with the more somber or even infantile environment, trying to capture the spectator in that universe, to tell you a story that's very dramatic, which was that period, those 5 years that were the start of the end of the utopia.
Muchas gracias. Reynier Leyva Novo studied at the San Alejandro Academy, the Instituto Superior de Arte, and the Cátedra de Conducta de Tania Bruguera. So he has exhibited in many places and keeps like a very active artist in Cuba.
I wanted to say that I didn't graduate from the. What I did is I left the studies in during the 4th year. I'm interested in a way to manifest, a way to tell the power, how the national figures are configured. And I'm going to tell you about 2 projects that I have been working on. There are 2 projects this year. This one is called SOPA. And these are also the acronym, the Society Living Under Pressure. These spoons are engraved with phrases from activists. They have used the words to put pressure on the politics from many parts of the world, and they have produced these thoughts in very difficult conditions where they deprive them of liberty. It was the food, it was also the thoughts, because of the absence of because of the hunger. About 150 spoons. There are activists who are American, Chinese, Polish, also Cuban. There are about 7 or 8 Cubans. A couple of them, 2 of them, died in jail because of this hunger strikes. They were political prisoners, basically. They are engraved with a laser on the spoon. And this is a series that I've been developing for 2 years. I just finished the first set of works over the image of Fidel Castro and the iconographic anthology. I finished this series a month before Fidel died in November last year. It was called One Happy Day. What I did is erase the image of the leader, of the dictator. I erased them from his picture. This is the first part of the series. This is, and each picture has its own context. This is work that I would like Cristina to be here. I took basically most of the pictures that Cristina Vives published about Corda's work. This picture is a picture of Fidel in his first trip to the United States in 1959. And he is with a dancer, a blind dancer, and she is touching him to recognize him. This is one of the pictures that I like the best because you appreciate the tense moment, like touching God, or like touching a utopia, to be in context. This is a series that I've been trying to cover with other political figures, mostly dictators, like Mao Zedong, Franco, and also the last one that I'm working on. Once we go through these, that has to be that deals more with the American context. At the beginning, I tried to subtract the image, but also I realized that they not only existed as people, but there was also press about them, propaganda, and other things that presented them. So I started to erase the image from posters, from photographs. This is also in the United States. These pictures are color pictures that we don't know. The epic photography in Cuba have shown us the revolution in black and white. And this is a picture taken by an American photographer, 1969. His name was Lee. This is Fidel playing in the snow with Khrushchev. And pictures that are presented here are medium-sized format, and they have a reference picture on the right in a smaller size. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the 5 presenters here at this panel. And I think we better move on to questions from the audience here. We don't have a lot of time.
Questions or comments to the panelists. Any question? Who?
Hassan?
Oh, sorry.
It seems like the political narrative that was presented here was one-sided. And in order to understand the presentation, one needed first to have political discussion. In a land of the free, we should have political discussion so that we can understand the context of the individual's views and their art. So why not the political discussion? And why do we only hear one side when the world and the American people believe that hatred should be overcome by love?
But what's your question? Oh, it's only a comment.
Presented to you to respond.
But tell me exactly what the question is.
Why the one-sided political narrative and not a political discussion or a balanced view before?
Well, this panel has a theme, and the theme is the art in Cuba as a critical space. So that's the theme. And I think that all of these artists are part of artists who have developed a work in which they have approached the complex reality in Cuba in a critical, profound way. And that's what we are discussing in this panel.
Well, I'm a Cuban. I'm from Cuba too, and I would like to answer his comment. I think that this presentation is not omit or is not focused only in a side of the Cuban politic, because if you go to the books, if you go to internet, if you go to all this kind of information about the revolutionary process, you're gonna get the other side, no? You're gonna get the people who said the officialist history, that if you know about the Cuban history, in books, in education, and all these kind of things, they talk only about the triumph of the revolution. My English is not good, but I'm trying to do the best. And the artist is the other face of the, how can I say that in English? The other face of the
coin.
Okay. Es la otra cara de la moneda.
Yeah, the other face of the coin, la otra cara de la moneda. The Cuban art and artists are the ones who try to talk about the other side who's been censored by the officials. So when we talk about the history in Cuba, we're going to find all the victory and how good the revolution was, all their goals, and we're not going to see all the failures. Oh, but we can't even call them failure. We can call them mistakes, like every political system, like any system. Obviously has good things and bad things. But in Cuba's case, the image is always from the outside has been an image of triumph. And it's not like that. We have been a generation who has suffered many different processes when we've seen realities completely different to the rest of the world. We have not have access to information. We don't have freedom or liberties. As a matter of fact, a government that it's in power for 60 years doesn't give you a lot of freedom. And that's very easy to understand when they tell you that you need to thank the educational system that we have, and then we see how precarious everything else is. It's very complex to see this from the outside. And that happens with a lot of people that go visit the island with that optimistic side to want to know what happens. And then they realize that the reality is very complex, and we can only understand it if we live there. And also doesn't have this second conversation. The second conversation that you can hear here is not going to appear in any official newspaper or magazine in Europe and in Cuba. No book or nothing. Even if you go to the University of Havana, where are all the publications? All the theoretical or movement, very well known, and it has a following of teachers and researchers that are working on it that is locked up, omitted. Nobody talks about that. So art is who has had to take this role and had to be the ones talking and doubting and questioning, is being the voice of the minority and the voice of a sector that, obviously for being the minority, we're just a few. I don't know. That's my point of view. We're not talking about the negative side. We're trying to show you both sides of the coin, because the official speeches, we all know them, and everybody already has heard those type of their own production or communication. That's what I want to say. Thank you. And another thing that happens is that if you see the work of different artists, it's not their political position. It's simply what things they live through, and that's how they react to it. It's not a political vision only. It's just the real experience of the artist, his own reality, the reality that that artist is living through, and that's what they represent on their work. It's not something made up. You live your reality, and you have to represent that in some way or another. It's simple. Excuse me, 1 second. Give me a second, because this image is in the background, and I wanted to ask you if you'd rather have this or this. This one. Oh, okay, now we're ready.
Thank you very much. The works and perspectives are very interesting and thought-provoking, so thank you for sharing that. I was thinking about what the photographer, Mr. Gonzalez, was saying in terms of highlighting things that aren't talked about in Cuba in terms of sexuality, etc. And as I walked through the exhibition yesterday, I was just curious about the influence of the Afro-Cuban people, because I'm not too familiar, but walking around, I didn't know where that presence was. And every time I go to Cuba, I talk to the people, all different races, and it's like one Cuba, but my experience is different. When I walk into a hotel and somebody speaks Spanish aggressively to see if I'm a native or not, to actually allow me in. So how does that work with this exhibition and your experiences?
Well, there's a very moving image by Thomas Edison, who's an African Cuban, he portrayed Che Guevara as an African Cuban. So, and you will find also the work by Jose Bedia, who borrows from Santeria and other traditional African traditions in Cuba. So you find, like, around the exhibition, the presence, or the very strong presence of Africa in Cuban culture, which is part of, even if you are white, you are inherited cultural traditions from Cuba, just for your education or your living in the island. So there several of the artists who are part of the exhibition are black artists, and one of the curators, Rene Francisco, is a black man. So I think it's quite present in the show, the diversity in Cuba. Yes, please.
A question for Alejandro. I saw your piece last night and going through the piece that portrays the gray period. And I think you know that those events, both by supporters and opponents of the revolution, are viewed as a very dark period for Cuban artists. And so it was very appropriate that piece was there. Could you reflect, though, yourself as an artist born much later and who exhibits on the island and has had his pieces, in a sense, projected there, talk about what that means for you as a contemporary artist, displaying and winning, as I see here, a prize from one of Cuba's most important institutions, the Casa de las Americas. How do you reflect on that? In other words, the impact of the gray period and what that speaks to for artistic freedom for those that work on the island like yourself. And the same, I suppose, could also go to our last presenter.
Well, precisely, it doesn't talk about liberties or freedom on that series at all. I don't know if I understood the question, but it's something like that. But this time, this 5-year gray period, it was very dramatic. It's not that they were not practicing this type of measures, you can say, before those 5 years. In the 60s already, there was a figure, a judicial figure that the police was using in order to take you into custody for having long hair, being gay, wear jeans, blue jeans, anything that was outside of the prototype, the standard that they were trying to establish. I think on that 5-year gray period, what they did was pass it into law. They have the Educational Congress and Culture in '61, where they expose already at a state level everything that they were allowed and not allowed to do. Raúl Martínez, one of the biggest artists in Cuba, from that generation also, and is here exposing too. He was kicked out of the university. He was a teacher. He was a professor. He was gay, only for being gay. So those 5 years, to me, are the end of the utopia, the process that was going to be spontaneous. We were all going to be part of it. And at that moment, I think it disappeared. And we started copying models, or the Soviet Union models. How can that work for us? If I think the value of art, if you can't talk about it at a round table in Cuba about these subjects, then it's in my hands to do it from my art, from my point of view. Take that back. Remember that. If you don't look back, you're not going to get ahead, because we have still some pending debts to pay, big ones. In 2006, there was an exposition in Casa de las Americas about this 5-year gray period. Everything evolved through some mailings, some disagreement established by mail. And I remember when I went and I tried to go in this theater where it took place with all the intellectuals, and the whole generation was not allowed to go in. They talk about the same thing again and nothing happened. Nobody talked to us, with the people that were 25, 30 years old at that moment. So they did the same thing over again. So I think that wound is still open, and we need to heal it. I think art has that power. I think That's why maybe I started taking that period again, like the other series about inappropriate conduct, when I talk about sexuality, gender differences, and different liberties, individual liberties. I don't know if that's will be my answer to you. No se escucha. Necesita el micrófono. Espere. El micrófono.
Fully understand. But how is that challenge? How is that critique you are now making as your generation? How, in your view, is this critique on sexuality and those other issues? How is that being received in Cuba on the island today? Do you feel who do you have support from? Who do you have opposition from?
We don't have any official support. Both series and all this work have been shown in Cuba, and we need to be realistic. I'm going to tell you this very quickly and badly, but in the 80s, I think that was the moment where this art and this artist were safe from the more established, I don't know the word, what word we can use, but they were more accustomed to. And they start with the censorship process, and then they realized that that was not such a big deal because it's just consumed by a minimal amount of people. It wasn't something that was going to get out of hand. It was contained at a gallery, and that's where it would be set. 200, 300 people would see, and that was it. So they realized that, I think, and they gave us certain flexibility nowadays, but we still have censorship, a lot of censorship nowadays. That I can see this, I can show this now, doesn't mean anything. The other day I went to make some copies of the same series, and I have to write a document to be able to export that from the country, and they had to question everything, the content of the images. Why? Why? I'm not making anything up. They're just images based on another images, on real facts. The same way that I can criticize the Congress of Culture and Education. There's other images where I'm talking about the construction of Alamar, a town that was made with all the socialist cooperation. And that was fine. It's maybe ugly nowadays, it's crazy, but it was reality, it was what's happening. There was a crisis. What can I say? How can I say it? There was the crisis of housing. We had to do something. The same that they built Las Vergas. A big problem because there was an important school, La Leni, is in complete shambles. 80% of the place is completely destroyed, abandoned. In one of the pictures, I talk about the inauguration, the opening of that school, which was something good, legitimate. It's a critic in the ideology of how they dealt with everything. But of course, there are events and things that I am. I am who I am because I owe it to that too, right?
Okay, well, we have to finish here, unfortunately, because we will have a second. Okay, Ella, I can see who the. Yeah, Ella.
Hello.
Final.
Okay. Yeah,
final question.
Well, I don't know if you know that some of the works I've been trying to get out of Cuba, they just don't let me take them out for some reasons that are absurd, like Hamlet, which is somebody that you all know.
Que todos conocen. I don't know if I should speak Spanish, if it's better for you. You're the ones that are going to answer. But you know that some of the artists, like Hamlet, they don't let you take the work of arts out of Cuba. I didn't know. They didn't let me take them out from Cuba. And not only did not let me take them out, but they wrote a letter to me saying that it was against the revolution when those works of art just repeat the images that had already been shown in some newspapers in Cuba, like Grandma or Lunes de Revolución, etc. But they considered that they were badly used and they didn't let me get them out. Now, I would like to ask you, where do you show your work? The government entities, are they concerned about giving you a space, like the museum or things like, I don't know, like Jorge Fernandez did at one instance, but I see very little of your work in the official sites, the official places, and I want to know what's the chance the government gives all of you to express your art, which is the Cuban reality of nowadays. Well, it is not probable that I could show this series of Fidel in Cuba. It is not probable that I will be able to show it in any of the government institutions. And it's not worth it. It's not worth it to put it in those institutions because it's so precarious, lack of resources, lack of professionalism. There is a big crisis in the system, in the cultural system and educational system. And it's so big that that has affected everything, galleries and art centers. Right now, I think the only place where we can expose this or exhibit this is in 2 or 3 independent places. We have like El Apartamento, the apartment, where La Bastilla had them, or these other pieces of art, works of art that they didn't let you take out of the country are there. All of this are in a blacklist, like Ella is saying. We can't have his name in the news, in any publications in Cuba. Nowadays, his work cannot be shown in any galleries or any center, art center, official, government one. Because I don't know if you know that 95% of all the cultural spaces in Cuba belong to the government. They're not independent. And that those centers, they answer to a political culture, very specific, very close. So basically, that's it, Ella. We don't have any possibilities to show our art in Cuba right now.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias a los panelistas. Thank you very much for your questions and comments. And we will have a second panel coming in 10 minutes, right?